Hello. You are joining the 2021 Institute and Faculty of Actuaries Presidential Address. I'm pausing just for a moment so that we can allow as many of the attendees who have been in the waiting room as possible to get online. So I'm just watching as the numbers tick up and then we will get the event itself properly underway. Right, yes, that looks like very good numbers coming in. Well, so hello again and welcome to this year's Institute and Faculty of Actuaries Presidential Address. This is the second year that we're holding the event entirely virtually. So wherever you are listening to us, you are very welcome. My name is Annette Spencer and I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Research at the IFoA. Today, I also have the job of introducing the IFoA's new president and helping to put your questions to her. On the subject of questions, we're going to be using the Q&A function today during the second half of the session to be able to take your questions. You can ask a question at any time during the address itself or any time after the address, and then we will try and answer as many of them as we can with the time we have available. We're not using the chat function today, and we're not using the raise hand function either. So please just focus on the Q&A if you want to ask a question. It's also been suggested that you might want to adjust your view so that you are on speaker view, and that will enable you to be able to focus on the president when she is speaking. So those are the housekeeping notes, I think, how to view us effectively and how to ask questions. So let me turn to our new president, Louise Pryor. I am deliberately not going to say very much about Louise, as I know that she is going to introduce herself much more effectively than I could as part of her address. In summary, she has had a very varied career as an actuary, software engineer and academic, and worked in diverse organisations ranging from small tech startups through to the Financial Reporting Council. Today, Louise works as an independent consultant in the areas of software risk and sustainability, on which she will say more shortly. She is also chair of the London Climate Change Partnership and a non-executive director at the Ecology Building Society. Louise has a degree in mathematics from Cambridge University and a PhD in artificial intelligence from Northwestern University. She became a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries in 1987 and has been involved with IFoA working parties and various other volunteer groups off and on since 2002. She was first elected to the IFoA Council in 2015 and as president-elect in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, the new president of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries.
Thank you, Annette. And hello and welcome to you all, wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. Although it's a shame in some ways that we can't be together in Staple Inn, the upside of being online is that so many people from around the world are able to be here. Around 30 countries are represented. And although I can't see you, I'm pleased that many colleagues, friends and family have been able to make it. It's an enormous honour to be chosen as president of the IFoA, an organisation with a long history, a global reach and an ambitious strategy. Over the past year, I've had the pleasure of working on the presidential team with John Taylor and Tan Sui Che as the executive have started to deliver council strategy for 2020 to 24. I look forward to working with Tan Sui Che and Matt Saker over the next year as we continue this work. There's a widespread view that we are living in a period of great change. Indeed, this has been a theme of many recent presidents in their addresses. Today, I'm going to give you my perspective on that theme and argue that in order to survive and be sustainable, we as actuaries and the IFoA as an organisation must keep learning. Last year in his address, Tan Sui Che argued that we should revive the spirit of a learned society and bring thought leadership to the foreground. I believe that in order to do that, and indeed in order to implement the IFoA's strategy of supporting our members to adapt to change in their existing fields of work, as well as moving into wider fields, we also need to be a learning society. I asked some actuarial friends what they consider have been the major changes over their careers. Here's a selection of their responses.
Complexity, documentation, and regulation.
And we've become also more digital and paperless, and we can more efficiently manipulate large volumes of data.
I've also seen lots of change in the area of mathematical and actuarial developments. And that combined with more sophisticated modeling tools, data analytics, has seen step changes in actuarial science.
During my short time in the pensions industry, I've seen a definite shift in focus, more long-term strategy discussion and endgame planning.
I think versus when I started back in the 80s and indeed through the 90s, there are now fewer actuaries at the upper echelons of major insurance organizations.
I think the biggest change I've seen was the reduction in interest rates. When I started my career, they were up at around 10% per annum, and obviously now are nearly zero.
For me, interestingly, it's climate change and sustainability that have just accelerated up the agenda, probably fueled by some regulatory interest and the need for urgent action across business and society.
One of the biggest changes I have seen has been the beginning of diversity within the profession. I know we have a long way to go, but it's been amazing to witness the start of it.
Many thanks to Kalpna, Chantal, Charles, Ross, Evelyn, Trevor, Lucy, and Mukami. Many of the points they make chime with my own experience. Although the IFoA in its current form dates only from 2010, it has a long history. It's the result of a merger between the Institute of Actuaries, founded in England in 1847, and the Faculty of Actuaries, founded in Scotland in 1856. There were 70 presidents of the Institute, 60 of the faculty, and I'm the 12th president of the IFoA. Allowing for repeat offenders, that makes me the 139th president in all. I don't have detailed information, but without doubt, nearly all the 138 previous presidents worked in either life insurance or pensions. 12 of them have been called John and 11 William, but I'm only the 4th woman, and only 2 presidents have been based outside the UK. It hasn't been a very diverse group. I'm thus atypical. In fact, I'm atypical in several ways. Not only am I a woman, but my career history has been far from standard. So I'll start by describing my career so far and the changes that have occurred along the way. I became a student of the Institute of Actuaries in 1981. I'd studied maths at university and was hired as an actuarial analyst by a firm of pension consultants. This was in spite of being advised by the University Careers Service to become a teacher, which they suggested to all women studying maths, and in spite of being told by a partner of one of the largest consultancies that they had never had a woman qualify with them. I'm pleased to report that I made rapid progress through the exams. However, I turned out to be fairly unenthusiastic about pensions, so I soon moved employers to start working as a consultant in life insurance. I finished the exams in 1985, becoming an associate, and around then moved into general insurance. I became a fellow in 1987 when I completed the 2 years of experience that were then required. Probably the most significant change during this period was the advent of personal computing. When I started out in 1981, we had no PCs. We did use computers for pension fund valuations and then for modeling life offices, but had to use special terminals to connect to them. And there were no interactive applications such as spreadsheets, so all the programming was in Fortran. By the end of the decade, spreadsheets were widely used for many routine calculations. For those of us working in life insurance, other changes were afoot. An increasing proportion of new business was unit linked rather than with profits, a development that was part of the long-term transfer of risk from institutions to individuals that we've seen over the last half century. It was also a development that was ignored in the exams. Also in this period, the control cycle, that current exam staple, was introduced to unsuspecting actuaries in a paper to the Student Society, the precursor of the staple in Actuarial Society. As well as all the traditional actuarial techniques, I was learning about what went on in practice in the life insurance industry and then in general insurance. And I was learning a lot about computer programming. Although I'd been programming since my early teens and had always enjoyed it, this was when it really took hold of me. This was to prove a significant development in the coming years. In 1988, I changed direction rather more radically. I went off to the States to study for a PhD in computer science, specializing in artificial intelligence. I loved my years in grad school. It was a great time. Being a full-time student again, but this time with added time management skills, was enormous fun. I came back to the UK in 1993 and was a university lecturer for 3 years before deciding that academia wasn't for me. I went into the software industry, working for startups. This was during the dot-com boom, and it was an exciting time, if somewhat precarious, when the inevitable bust followed the boom. At the turn of the century, I was hired by a startup analysing financial risk. The technicalities of actuarial work had changed significantly in my absence. The world was full of new terms such as stochastic modelling, value at risk, economic scenario generator, asset liability modelling, and option pricing approaches. I did some rapid learning. Mark to market had also more or less completely taken over. At the end of the 1980s, many pensions actuaries had still been using the so-called actuarial value of assets, calculated by discounting future cash flows, but by now market values ruled. Another change was the growth of risk management as an explicit skill set for actuaries, and spreadsheets were by now all pervasive. Many of these changes had started in the 80s, but had gathered pace in the 90s. The rate of change was distinctly non-linear. Stochastic modelling, for example, had first been introduced in the context of maturity guarantees in 1980, but only became mainstream 10 to 15 years later. In the 80s, the adoption of technology had really been about automating existing analyses and speeding them up. In the 90s, we were seeing that automation allowed us to do things we simply hadn't been able to do before. Email had been ubiquitous in academia in the late 80s, certainly in computer science, and was in general use everywhere else by the end of the 90s. Mobile phones also became mainstream at around this time, and the World Wide Web was invented in 1989 and was widespread by the end of the 90s. Importantly for actuaries, Equitable Life ran into problems with its guaranteed annuities, losing a case in the House of Lords in the year 2000. More on that later. As I've said, for some of this period, I was in academia, first as a student and then as faculty, so learning was high on my agenda. I learned a lot more about computer programming and computer science, by no means the same thing, and about software engineering. My time working for startups also brought home to me the importance of business models and strategy, and above all, the importance of cash flow. In 2002, I was made redundant and decided that it was time to get out of the uncertain world of software startups. So I moved to the uncertain world of freelancing and set myself up as a software risk consultant. The idea was that I would consult to actuaries and others about how they used and developed software with a special emphasis on spreadsheets. I started networking frantically and found that the best and by far the most enjoyable way to do it was through the actuarial profession. I went to Jaro and joined working parties as well as finding my way onto various committees for the Finance and Investment Board and Professional Standards. At this time, the way the UK actuarial profession was organised was changing. The near collapse of equitable life at the turn of the century had led eventually to the Morris Report, which contained some fairly trenchant and widely shared criticisms of actuaries, and recommended that the Financial Reporting Council should oversee the actuarial profession and set technical standards. In 2007, my domestic circumstances changed, and I moved back down south from Edinburgh, where I'd spent 11 very happy years. By then, the FRC had established its actuarial function, and when I decided I needed to get a proper job, that's where I ended up. I started out as their general insurance specialist, but then became the Director of Actuarial Standards, leading the team that developed the Technical Actuarial Standards, or TASIs. These were among the most interesting and rewarding years of my career. I learned about the full range of actuarial work, as well as about professional regulation. I found that writing standards has many similarities to computer programming. You must always keep the top level goal in mind, but it's really important to get every tiny detail exactly right. There was also the fun of construction, of building something, which is also true of programming. It was also an interesting time because the actuarial world was still changing quite rapidly. The main drivers were regulation and the increased availability of processing power and data storage. These combined to fuel the increasing dominance of risk-based capital and internal models for insurers. Meanwhile, it had become evident that mortality rates in the UK were improving both rapidly and consistently. Actuaries had to change their approach to mortality projections. It had only been in 1999 that the CMI had first issued any projection factors for mortality rates. Those first factors depended only on age and gender, but in 2002, the CMI introduced a methodology for applying them to different cohorts. The first version of the CMI stochastic projection model was only issued in 2010. The reputation of the actuarial profession, which had already suffered as a result of the equitable crisis and Morris Review, was badly hit by this perceived slowness to react. In many circles, our name was mud. Alongside all this, the 2008 financial crash changed the landscape, and in 2010, the institute and faculty merged. In 2012, the FRC completed the initial set of TASs, and I returned to freelancing. I thought then, and still do, that climate risk is by far the biggest problem facing the world, and wanted to do something to help address it. In 2013, I started to become heavily involved in what grew into the Sustainability Practice Board of the IFoA. Meanwhile, I was considering what freelance work I could do. I knew a fair bit about modelling, was learning fast about climate risk, and was interested in both of them. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so, though I haven't actually managed to combine them yet. The modelling work has mainly been concerned with pensions and social security reform in developing economies, while the climate risk work has mainly been looking at the impacts on insurance. Along the way, I've acquired various other roles, most of which are not specifically actuarial, though I bring my actuarial background to all of them. For a few years, I worked with the Centre for Risk Studies at Cambridge, looking at emerging risks. I'm involved in climate change adaptation through the London Climate Change Partnership. And I'm involved in sustainability in the built environment as a non-executive director of the Ecology Building Society and as an honorary professor at UCL's Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction. I also continue to learn about climate risk and sustainability through leading IFoA working parties. The actuarial world carries on changing. Over the last 10 years, we've seen data analytics become much more widespread as computing power and data storage capacity continue to grow. Quantitative risk and capital modelling are more dominant than ever. And a number of risks have newly emerged as significant, including cyber and, of course, pandemic risk. The consideration of climate risk has become mainstream and even mandated by regulators in many countries. Social media and blogs provide new ways of disseminating information. Video conferencing enables us to work with people regardless of their physical location, although time differences still cause problems. Meetings at 3 in the morning are no fun for anyone. In the last 18 months, COVID-19 has accelerated ongoing changes and driven the introduction of new ones. The IFoA moved all its events and exams online rapidly in April 2020. We've developed new ways of working with volunteers through our COVID-19 Action Task Force, or ICAT, which at its peak had around 90 work streams and 500 volunteers. I've seen huge changes over my career. Interest rates are at the heart of much actuarial work. In the 1980s, they were both high and volatile, ranging between 9 and 15%. Since 2008, they've been low and stable, staying at under 1% for over 12 years now. There's been a transfer of risk from institutions to individuals, exemplified by the growth of unit-linked life insurance and defined contribution pensions in the UK. There are new types of risks, such as climate risk, that simply weren't on the horizon 20 years ago. And our techniques and models are much more sophisticated than they used to be. There have been major changes in the IFoA too. It's grown. We now have over 33,000 members compared to 6,000 in 1981. In 1981, only 6% of us were women. Now it's 36%. When I became a student in 1981, there were under 300 other women students of the Institute. In 1985, I became one of only around 60 women associates. And in 1987, I joined a select group of under 100 women fellows of the Institute. There are now well over 4,000 women fellows of the IFoA. And we now have a single professional body in the UK instead of two, and many more of our members are based outside the UK. The organisation has had to learn how to operate on a completely different scale. It's had to learn how to do new things and use new tools such as the web and social media. All these changes means that those of us who've been in the profession for the longer than 3 or 4 years have had to learn new skills since we started. We can't operate in today's world using yesterday's skill set. I asked some actuarial friends what they've learned over the course of their careers. Here are some of their responses.
In my career to date, I've dabbled across various different fields, and so in the process of that, had to build up vast new skills each and every time that I've switched and changed.
Generalized linear models.
Starting as a pensions actuary, after moving to Kenya, I have picked up skills in social security pensions and unemployment benefits, and in advising insurance and reinsurance companies.
And stochastic modeling.
Definitely the most fun new skill I've learned was data wrangling in R. I'd like to do more of that.
Communication.
Team leadership.
Moving into a technology function and away from a traditional financial risk management role has helped me tremendously to understand business context at an operational level.
Negotiation skills.
In my company, we are backing a long-term investment product using cattle. I've learned a lot about farming, about community relations with smallholder farmers surrounding our farm who we work with. Also, mass media marketing as we promote our very innovative product.
And also influencing skills at management level.
The biggest skill that I've learned is networking. I've networked with people through actuarial dining clubs, through sessional meetings, and over the last 18 months via Zoom, through webinars and so on.
Thanks to Dan, Karen, Darshan, Angarad, Pun, Rathi, Kelvin, and Catherine for their insights. This learning process, both individual and organisational, must continue and pick up pace if we're to remain relevant in the 21st century. One of the three key themes of the IFoA's strategy for 2020 to 24 is centered on supporting members by developing their skills so they can adapt to change in their current fields of work, as well as moving into wider sectors. It's all about learning. A major plank supporting the 2020 strategy is our Learning Change programme, which aims to modernise, deepen and broaden the IFoA's actuarial qualifications and lifelong learning support. When I took the exams all those years ago, there seemed to be a disconnect between the actuarial exams and what I spent my time doing in practice. Much of the exam content seemed to be a possibly pointless intellectual exercise. I may be exaggerating here, but not by much. This has always been a problem for the profession: how to keep exam syllabuses up to date and relevant while not making life difficult for the students by changing them too quickly or getting carried away by short-lived fads. The Learning Change programme is currently reviewing the pre-associate syllabus to ensure the curriculum reflects the needs of the IFoA's students and their actual and potential employers. Some of the changes that will appear in the 2022 exams include more emphasis on both sustainability and banking, new skills and new fields of work. The second strand of the programme is the development of a broader portfolio of routes to fellowship. The first change from this strand will be the introduction of fellowship exams on banking, which we're hoping to offer from 2022. Other possibilities that are being considered include data science and sustainability. The third strand is around assessment methods. Over the last year, spurred by COVID-19, the IFoA has moved from paper-based closed book exams to online open book exams. This is a fantastic achievement and is the result of much hard work under intense time pressure from both executive and members. In the next couple of years, we're planning to provide wider access to all our students by moving to an exam delivery system. The final strand of the Learning Change programme, which is central to the whole endeavour, is lifelong learning. I've already discussed why lifelong learning is so vital. Of course, the exams are important, but changing them affects only those who are still taking them. There are currently over 15,000 fellows and associates who can't rely only on the skills that were tested when they took the exams towards the beginning of their careers. We already have an extensive range of events put on by practice boards and member interest groups, and the programme is looking at how else our members can be supported. For example, there are 2 new lifelong learning microsites on the IFO website on banking and sustainability. The sustainability microsite includes a really useful and extensive annotated reading list. And there's also a series of practical guides to climate risk for actuaries working in a range of practice areas. There are new credentials too. In 2019, we introduced the Certificate in Data Science, which now has over 330 graduates. Work on a credential in climate risk is well developed, with a pilot programme currently underway. If it's successful, we're hoping to be able to offer the full credential later this year. The Learning Change programme isn't the only activity in the IFoA that's supporting continued learning by our members. For example, a new CPD scheme was introduced last year, which encourages us to take responsibility for our own learning needs, rather than simply ticking off the required number of hours. And there's a lot of learning going on. I asked some of my actuarial friends what they're currently learning, and here are some of their replies.
How to integrate drought indices in social cash transfer programs in Africa.
Sustainability development.
Behavioral science, strategy, corporate social responsibility, and many other areas.
I'm currently learning about transfer learning and the bird language model.
I'm currently learning about biodiversity. It's been a fascinating topic.
I've been living in lots of different countries around Africa, so I've been particularly reading more about the history in some of the African countries where we've been living.
How to use satellite risk models to apply for typhoon index insurance in the South Pacific.
I currently work in defined benefits
and I will be rotating in the graduate program at the end of the year, and I can't wait to get experience in a new business area.
Digital financial services in Africa and the synergies that they have with insurance services.
At the moment, most of my focus is on understanding the implications and risks around climate change and how that impacts on the insurance industry.
Thanks to Agritosh, Cynthia, Chika, John, Nick, Laura, Katrina and Wendy, who are learning about such interesting topics. I've already described some of the changes that have occurred over the last 40 years, but change is continuous and still affecting actuaries and the IFoA. Technological change, driven by the growth of computing power, is clearly important as it expands the techniques that are available to us. A number of our colleagues are specializing in data science, where there are enormous opportunities for people who can both understand the technical aspects and relate the models to the business world. People who understand that models are tools, not oracles. Technological change is also a driver of the explosion in communication channels that's occurred over the last 40 years. First, fax took over from telex, then email and the web appeared, then text, and now we have social media, instant messaging, and video calls. The IFoA is learning to embrace video conferencing, allowing many more of our members to participate in working groups and attend online events, including this one. The COVID-19 Actuaries Response Group has made excellent use of social media and online resources to build a reputation for timely and informed comment, both within and beyond the profession. We hope that some of these new technologies will support us in providing different ways for our members to connect with each other and with the wider world. For example, we're currently operating pilot online digital communities for banking and data science, and hope to be able to start more in the coming months. Societal changes are equally important. Both diversity and sustainability risks have moved from the fringe to the mainstream, and it's to them that I now turn. Society is placing a growing emphasis on diversity. This is very welcome. For too long, we've drawn comfort from being surrounded by people like us and have failed to recognize the benefits that diversity brings. I've already illustrated the growing proportion of women in the IFoA over the past 40 years, but it's been a slow growth. Half the current women fellows have qualified since 2012, but only a third of the men. 10 years ago, 37% of our students were women. Now it's still only 42%. And even now, under 30% of our fellows are women. However, this is only one aspect of diversity. I focused on it partly because it affects me directly. There are only 50 women from my generation or earlier, and partly because we do have some statistics in the area. We also have statistics on how many of our members are based in the UK, but we have very few on other aspects of diversity. We're a profession founded on data, and we have a big gap in this area. This must change. We need to do more to increase diversity within the profession so that we can tap into the full potential that's available to us. Not only do we need to work with employers and universities to ensure there are no unintended barriers to entry, but we also need to make sure that we're supporting people from all backgrounds throughout their careers. We've made a good start by removing formal entry requirements, and the Learning Change programme will help to ensure that our qualification structure focuses on the competencies that are required to be an actuary today and in the future, rather than on past experience. Our Diversity Action Group is helping us to move to a position where the IFoA offers all members the support they need and the volunteering opportunities they deserve, but there's much work still to do. Over the last few years, climate change has become increasingly visible as a source of risk, and biodiversity is starting to become visible too. But it's important to realize that climate change itself isn't a risk, it's a certainty. Climate change and biodiversity are both happening and are both being driven by human behavior. The risks are posed by the impacts of these changes. For example, potential impacts of climate change include severe weather events such as floods and droughts, mass migration, civil unrest, and many others. They also include changes to consumer demand, business models, the financial system, the economy, and regulations, all of which will directly affect actuaries and the users of their work. The impacts of climate change pose long-term risks with significant financial effects. They go to the heart of what we do. These climate stripes act as a reminder that ignoring it doesn't make climate change go away. So I'm going to keep them visible for the rest of this talk. However, sustainability risks are in many ways quite different from the other risks that actuaries traditionally deal with because of the deep uncertainty involved. There are intrinsic limits to predictability in complex systems, and we're certainly dealing with very complex systems here. Sustainability risks aren't repeatable. They can't happen over and over again. Instead, they're chronic and long-lasting. Their impacts are systemic, wide-ranging, and may include fundamental changes to the economic and financial systems. We don't have direct historic data on the impacts because climate change and biodiversity loss to this extent simply haven't happened in recent human history. We can't derive probability distributions for them. Moreover, the impacts of sustainability risks are irreversible. It's not possible to recover from them and return to the past position. Non-linearity and the existence of tipping points mean that there's no going back. We can't restore species that have gone extinct, and we can't refreeze ice caps that have melted within any reasonable timescales. All these characteristics mean that we don't know how to calculate the cost of these impacts. What's the monetary value of a fundamental change in how our world operates? So there's a major risk management challenge. How can these risks be managed? And they must be managed at many different levels. We must manage them at the global and societal levels, but insurers, pension schemes, and other organizations have to manage them too. And global systemic risks like this can't be hedged. But what's all this got to do with actuaries and learning? As you might have guessed, the answer is a lot in both cases. First, climate change poses significant financial risks to insurers and pension schemes, our traditional employers and clients. We'll be letting them down if we ignore those risks, which means, of course, that we must learn about them and about their potential impacts. If we don't, we'll lose all credibility as a risk management profession. Second, addressing this major societal risk management challenge requires new skills. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for actuaries to use our unique insights, evolve our expertise, and collaborate with other experts to help provide the new paradigms and methodologies that are needed. And we have a head start as actuaries are currently very active in this area in the insurance industry. But the skills are needed everywhere, especially in banking, where climate-related risks are near the top of the agenda for regulators in the UK and indeed globally. And we need to up our game. We can't rely only on quantitative methods of assessment, for example, but we'll have to develop and extend our use of more qualitative methods, such as scenarios and narratives. We'll also need to make sure our models take account of the significant structural change that will affect the economic and financial systems. And we need to recognize that climate-related risks can't be seen in isolation from other risks. They arise from the complexity of the overall ecological, social, and economic system that we live in. So we must make more use of systems thinking techniques. We can only address the problems posed by climate change if we recognize their interactions with the diversity of human experience and with both global and local inequalities. Society must find a just transition to a low carbon world that supports both society and biodiversity, one that seeks to ensure that the substantial benefits are shared widely while also supporting those who stand to lose economically. This is a very actuarial problem. Actuaries have been thinking about fairness and balancing the interests of different groups of people along varying timescales for nearly 2 centuries. So yes, it's a huge challenge, but also a major opportunity. If we ignore it, we'll fast become irrelevant, sidelined as one of those quaint historic professions with no place in the world of the future. If we embrace it, we can help to lead society's efforts to create a better world. Last year, the IFoA Council endorsed the report of its Climate-Related Risks Task Force, which has resulted in a major programme of work to ensure that IFoA members are equipped to deal with these challenges. All actuaries should be considering climate risk and other sustainability risks in the same way as they consider major risks such as interest rates and mortality. The practice boards have all developed engagement plans to raise awareness of how climate risk affects established areas of actuarial work and to provide support to their communities. There are also several other groups who are addressing climate risk problems from a variety of perspectives. The Economics Member Interest Group is looking at how economic theories take account of sustainability issues. The Financial Systems Thinking Innovation Centre, or FinSTIC, is looking at how systems thinking can be applied to changing the financial system so that it delivers for society, the environment, and the economy. And the Actuaries Carbon Collaboration is acting on climate solvency by working towards a coherent understanding of the issues around carbon emissions and offsets by considering them in an actuarial context. These are all examples of the IFoA learning to work in new ways, groups led by actuaries, collaborating with others with various degrees of formality. We're working towards a much more open and facilitated culture where the IFoA can provide a platform for groups of thought leaders to come together and discuss interesting and provocative ideas. This is an area where technological developments can make all the difference. During this year, we've had several series of thought leadership events addressing such topics as finance in the public interest, actuarial innovation in the COVID-19 era, and behavioural science. In the coming year, you can expect more of the same, with an especial focus on sustainability in the run-up to COP26 this autumn. At the beginning of this year, the IFoA issued a policy statement on climate change, supporting the aim of the Paris Agreement to limit climate change to an increase of substantially under 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial temperatures, and recognising that for there to be a reasonable probability of achieving this aim, there must be a transition to a global economy that has no net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The IFoA will continue to work with national and supranational organisations to better align the financial system with a net zero ambition. But it's not only the IFoA which must play its part. All actuaries can also lead change in the financial system to serve the public interest in the management of climate-related risk. It's an enormous challenge, but also an enormous opportunity. Change can create new openings as well as closing old dead ends. There are opportunities for actuaries and also for the industries many of us work in. Financial institutions such as insurers and banks must ensure that their products and services actively drive the change that is needed for a transition to a net zero world and support people negotiating the rapidly changing risk landscape. And we actuaries can help them do that. I'm proud to be an actuary. It's enabled me to have an extremely varied career, and the actuarial skill set has proved to be a fantastic foundation for learning new skills and branching out into new areas. And I'm not alone in my view. I asked some actuarial friends what they enjoy about what they're currently doing.
I have loved my career, I really have. And a lot of it is the people that you work with, actually.
Because I love the fact that I can use my actuarial skills in different ways that I had not thought possible before to solve problems that I had not encountered before.
These ideas will help develop safety nets, non-traditional safety nets for the millions of people affected by the food security and poverty issues that will come as a result of climate change.
Having spent most of my life working for large established companies, it has been exciting growing a new business.
I'm contributing in a small way to addressing some of the biggest challenges facing humanity, and in doing so, helping to improve financial outcomes for pension scheme members.
Well, it's a tremendous opportunity to continue to learn. It's extremely worthwhile, if not vital. And I love working with people who think differently to me.
I'm looking for an adventure. I love learning. That's why I kept doing all those degrees and probably still have a few more to do. So I absolutely love learning.
Thanks to Dick, Mega, Faisal, Pinni, Claire, Ashok and Kudzai for reminding us of so many good things. Oops. The times we're living in are challenging, to say the least. As I've discussed, change is all around us, and in many ways, change is uncomfortable. Change is affecting our traditional fields of work as well as opening up potential new fields. And we have to be able to learn new skills in order to handle challenges as well as seize opportunities. We need a growth mindset to adapt to our changing world. Learning is absolutely vital to our well-being. The IFoA must learn as an organisation if it's to survive, and must support its members' learning if they are to be successful. The sustainability of our profession depends on learning. As well as being a learned society, the IFoA must be a learning society.
Thank you very much, Louise. I think you have followed in a long tradition of IFoA presidential addresses in giving us something which both inspired and challenged us. And what has come through in your address this morning, I think, is a really clear sense of the issues which are going to be your focus during the coming year. So we now move into the second part of this session, which is obviously the opportunity to try and answer as many questions as we can that are coming in from you. So thank you to those of you who have already sent us some questions in. Just a reminder, the best way for you to send us a question is using the Q&A function. So just type in the question and then Louise and I can see those questions and we'll get through as many as we can. So Louise, if you've had a chance to have a sip of water and take a breath, I might just dive straight in. We've got all kinds of topics from the quite broad and philosophical to some very specific and technical. I think I'm going to start with one that's quite broad, if that's okay. So in your address, you have talked about the way that you personally have constantly evolved and changed in your career and interests, and in particular, of course, the role of learning as a part of that. You also talked a little bit about sometimes the uncomfortable aspects of change. And so the question is, what is the advice that you would give to help anyone welcome change rather than resist it? And I guess, do you have a trick for how you overcome any discomfort you have with change?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, Annette. I mean, change is uncomfortable. The fear of the unknown, but maybe you can sort of recast that, as it were, as a love of the familiar. But on the other side of the coin, there's the fear of missing out, or you could recast it as the fun of discovery, or maybe you think about a lack of change is boring, it's a lack of challenge. But I think the thing I found is that actually the new world, the change, as it were, going for a change, is not as strange, not as unknown as you think it's going to be. There's usually a surprising amount of things that sort of carry on over from one situation, as it were, to another. And I have found, I think, in my career that it's very easy to get locked into your current world. So, for example, I went off and I did a PhD, and then I was a junior lecturer for some years. And that was kind of what academics do. That's the career progression. And you kind of feel, well, that's what I do, and that's what successful academics do, so that if I don't do that, I'm not successful and everything. But you need to step out of that and realize that actually there's more to life than just that particular little closed world. That sounds demeaning to academia, and I don't mean that at all, but more to that sort of world, more to life than that way of doing it. My regrets, I think, have mostly been around not moving on soon enough, staying with things that I thought were okay at the time, if not perfect, but then I changed and I found that what I thought was okay wasn't actually nearly as good as you could get. So yes, there is a sort of factor of bravery, of being prepared to go out and try new things. But the other thing is that just because you make a change doesn't actually necessarily mean that you have to stick with that change. You could, you know, change another thing. Very few things are completely irreversible in this respect.
Thank you, Louise. I think lots of really good advice there, particularly I think the positive reframing if you're feeling a bit nervous about it. And as you say, actually just being prepared to try things and not see it as a once for all kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Right. So I'm going to move us on into a question now that is picking up on where you were talking about the new credentials that you mentioned in your address. So it was really exciting to hear about banking and climate change, hopefully coming along and joining the one that we already have on data science. So do you have any more detail about what might be on the curriculum for these courses, and I guess where and when might people expect to be able to find out more? I might add in a related question as well that has come in on the data science one. So one of our attendees asking, is there a plan to make data science a pathway to fellowship? So that seems to be kind of part of these learning and credential kind of questions.
Yeah, I'll just take the pathway to fellowship. Yeah, it's something we're exploring. We have to look at whether we think sufficient people would be interested in taking it. And we also have to look at whether we've got the resources to support it. One of the things about our fellowship exams in particular is that they rely on a lot of our members to help develop the curriculum and in particular to set and mark the exams. And we need to make sure that we've got people who will be able to do that. Let's take the other credentials. So the banking fellowship exams are already on the website, the curriculum for 2022 in the Banking Lifelong Learning microsite. There are two fellowship exams that we're proposing. The specialist principal exam will cover the sort of key principles of banking, the clues in the name there, talk about what the main products are, sort of basically how banks operate, and the main risks in banking. I mean, we definitely need to recognize that this is where we focus, is on risks. The specialist at advanced levels should enable you to contribute to, in a bank as it were, to risk management, capital management, both of which of course actuaries do in insurers, and liquidity management, which is much more important in banking than in insurance, strategy, and understand the governance around all these. So you can go to the website and look at that. The climate change credential is still in pilot. We haven't published anything on it yet. You know, basically how we proceed from here depends on how the pilot goes. We're actually piloting both new content, obviously, but a new way of delivering a credential. We're trying new things. If it doesn't work, we're going to have to think again, as I said before. The pilot covers just over half what we think the total content might be. So it covers things like the physical and transitional impacts of climate change, who the stakeholders are, including supranational organizations like the UN and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and what their roles are. It covers financial regulation and financial disclosures, so it covers the TCFD recommendations and that sort of thing. There's a module on economics and how economics can take account of climate change. And there's a module on inequality, how climate change affects different people, different groups of people, different countries in different ways. So I can't, unfortunately, give you a firm timetable for this, because as I say, it depends on the pilot. But so far, so good. And I think we're all optimistic and hopeful that we might be able to offer something later this year.
Thanks, Louise. I think that's probably been very helpful for people to have a sense of kind of the order that these things might be coming in. And it sounds like they should keep a close eye on their IFoA newsletters and the website if they're interested in just keeping up with that. A bit of a related question that has come in specifically on banking. This says, how big do you think the vacuum is in banking for actuaries to fill? Is there any particular expertise that actuaries can bring to the banking world?
Yeah, I think the particular expertise that actuaries can bring is this focus on long-term risks. So banking, traditionally, the risk management has really been fairly short-term. And I mean, it's something I've learned in the building society that I have something to do with, is that on the whole, the emphasis is much more short-term than in, say, a life insurer. But something like climate risk is very long-term. It has effects ranging over timescales from 1 to 2 years through to many, many more. And I think that's a perspective actuaries can bring. Also, their actuaries are, or good actuaries are very good at relating these sort of risk ideas into a business context. So not just looking at the numbers, not concentrating just on the numbers, but looking at the sort of qualitative effects too. So I think that basically in banking, there's a bit of a vacuum because nobody's been doing this. And they're needing to learn new skills, so that if they can import some actuarial skills, that would certainly, I think, benefit banks, but it would also benefit our members as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think the sectors that traditionally our members have worked in, but also areas like banking, they're experiencing change as rapidly and sometimes as uncertainly, I suppose, as we are. So you're right. Actually, the skills that actuaries bring in helping to apply that and helping to understand that, I can see how that would really fill a vacuum in banking. So I hope that answers that particular question that came in. I'm going to move us on to another theme of your address. You talked throughout the address really about the rapid changes going on in what I'll call the digital world over the past few decades. And it actually made me think a little bit about earlier this week when we had the President of the Royal Society, Sir Adrian Smith, speaking in the Thought Leadership series. And he similarly talked about the developments and changes that are coming through with artificial intelligence and the relationship between AI and judgment. So the question is, what do you see as the main threats and the biggest opportunities, so threats and opportunities for actuaries from these rapid changes in the digital world and AI?
The main threat from AI is that, I guess, we ignore it, that we don't embrace it, we don't take advantage of the opportunities, that we get reduced to just being people who do the numbers, who run AI models without really understanding what's going on, and just sort of believe the numbers that come out of the model. We have to remember that AI is a tool. It's part of what goes into making decisions. We need to be able to contribute to that, and we can by understanding how the AI models work. Some of us will do it at a very technical level, others will do it at a more conceptual level, but understanding what the assumptions that go into them are, and so what some of the implications are. And it gives us an opportunity to step up and see the bigger picture. So AI runs on data, but not all information can actually be codified and fed into AI systems. And especially when you're thinking about the future, we don't have data about the future because it hasn't happened yet. So AI is very good at talking about how you can explain what happened in the past, how you can project the future if you expect it to stay roughly like the past. But if it's going to change a lot, then the AI results need to be treated with respect, but also with caution, with thinking about how they might or might not apply. So overall, numerical models are part of the information that's needed in order to make decisions, but not all the information. As I said in my address, they're tools, not oracles. You can compare spreadsheets if you like. I mean, in the 1980s, there was a huge fear that actuaries would be put out of business by spreadsheets. And it's easy for us to laugh now when spreadsheets are such a major tool of what we do. So I think we should think of AI as an opportunity, as a tool that will enable us to do more, to help us to spot new patterns that we haven't been able to spot before, but won't necessarily tell us what to do about them. Just another quick thing, as many of us always say, correlation is not causality. Just because we got a pattern, it doesn't mean that it's actually telling you about the reasons behind what's going on. So I think it's a huge, huge opportunity.
That's great, Louise. And I love the, again, the positivity in that, particularly the idea that there will always be a role for human and actuarial judgment. And I guess to see the machines as our friend and our tool, but something that we can use to help us rather than the other way around. So that's, again, very inspiring. We are, as you might expect, getting a lot of questions in about climate risk, climate change, and so on. So I'm going to try and just bundle a few things together here. So there's a question about climate scenario analysis, because it's highly relevant at the moment with the Bank of England and the Network for Greening the Financial System publishing scenarios for financial institutions to use. So a kind of question around how can actuaries use that, what should our role be, through to questions that say how can we use this as an opportunity to have greater influence over policy. So I guess I'm inviting you to talk about the range of different questions and thoughts on climate here.
Okay, how long have I got?
Well, I'll give you about 4 minutes, Louise.
Yeah, right. 4 hours might possibly be more appropriate, but okay, where to start? The first thing is that we have to be better at working with other people. I think we have to collaborate. We have to recognize that we have undoubted skills and insights, but so do other people. And so we must collaborate with others, especially climate scientists, for example. So I think I'm going to focus mostly on scenarios in this question because it's a bit of a peg that I can hang things off. So we need to understand how realistic scenarios are and sense check them. And I think this is actually a huge contribution we can make. So for example, if there's a range of scenarios that people are suggesting we use, how different are the assumed impacts in the different scenarios? Does that make sense? Are they different enough? Are they what you'd expect? Do they allow for interactions between the ecological and economic systems? For example, the Network for the Green, NGFS is easier to say. They assume that a continuation of current economic and population trends. And is that plausible, basically? We have to think about those sorts of things. We have to, for some cases, we have to use the scenarios that we're given for regulatory purposes exactly. For example, if regulators want us to use particular scenarios, we have to use them, but they may not be suitable for all purposes. I think one thing we've learned over the last year or so about scenarios is that Sometimes we're not good enough at thinking of scenarios that are extreme enough. I think the extent of the disruption that was caused by COVID-19 was foreseen by some people, but not by, but there were very many people who didn't. So we've learned a bit more about unexpected effects and the extent of systemic impacts. So we shouldn't, the other thing about scenarios is that they're meant to be plausible, but they needn't necessarily be likely. And the one thing we do know about any given scenario is that it is not going to play out exactly like that. But plausibility is really important. Some scenarios that we're seeing are extremely unlikely. Again, the NGFS disorderly delayed transition assumes that nothing really happens until 2030, that nothing changes until 2030, but global warming is still kept under 2 degrees. That, to my mind, is extremely unlikely. It would require massive financial, economic, and social change in an extremely compressed timescale. And believing that it's very likely could give a false sense of security. I mean, yes, it's possible, but it would take an awful lot to make that actually happen. And the hothouse world current policy scenario that the NGFS uses results in global warming of only 3 degrees if we do nothing, if we carry on along our current path. Most current evidence is that it's extremely likely that doing nothing would lead to irreversible global warming well beyond 3 degrees. So our scenarios like this giving a full sense of security. So as actuaries, we need to think about the big picture as well as the detail. We need to consider the worst that can happen as well as the best. Actuaries do think about what the most likely path is, but as risk management professionals, we have to consider the whole range of outcomes. And so we must help ensure that our employers and clients, and indeed society at large, aren't lulled into a false sense of security. We should use our professional skills, collaborating with other experts, to make sure that we really understand the underlying assumptions and how plausible and likely scenarios are.
Thank you. And that was exactly 4 minutes, as well as being extremely informative. And I think hopefully answering a fair few of the different questions that have been asked in that area. I mean, I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about the need for that kind of evidence and data base, but also, if you like, a willingness to consider both the best and the worst scenarios in this area. I know I always find the worst scenarios rather sobering, but I think you are right that we do need to understand what it could look like if people just keep being complacent about what might be ahead of us. So
yeah, if I can just say that, it can be very, very scary. But honestly, ignoring that doesn't make it not happen, you know?
I can see the bar running along the bottom of your screen even now, Louise, so that's a good reminder that it doesn't go away. I think I'm going to change the topic again. I know we're jumping around a bit, but I want to try and get through as many topics as I can. And I think where we're going to go now, I mentioned that we had some questions that, well, certainly I'm describing them as quite technical. So I think we might be tapping into your mathematical academic knowledge here. So there's a couple of these, they're not strictly related, but I'm going to put them together if that makes sense. So there's a question that says, you talked in your address about various changes through time and mark to market being something that I think you noticed when you came back into work after you'd been in academia. And the question is, do you think mark to market was beneficial for long-term entities, and if so, why? There was also a question related to that about kind of what's our unique insight in this area as actuaries. And then I rather like this, but that's just a personal view. A question that says they think the actuarial profession lost its way because of the Black Skulls revolution, and that kind of passed the profession by. And the question is, do you think we can reclaim the lost ground in financial mathematics?
Okay, this is not my specialist area. I have to say that. It's actually not clear I really have a specialist area in many ways. I think of myself as a generalist. But if I did have a specialist area, this would not be it. So what I'm going to do is to essentially talk as an outsider. And so take everything I say with a slight pinch of salt. Mark to market, is it beneficial for the long term? I have concerns about mark to market. If you take something like a pension scheme, the aim of the pension scheme, and indeed long-term life insurance business, the aim is to pay the liabilities as they fall due over the next, I don't know, it could be 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Mark to market assumes that everything that the market reflects a lot of what is known about the future. And it also, if you're comparing the liabilities with the assets, and the assets are done on market values, it assumes that the liabilities are valued, if you like, consistently with those assets. And I don't want to go into detail because, as I say, I'm not an expert, but as an outsider, I find some of these assumptions quite difficult to swallow. I find it quite difficult to think that there is a deep and widely traded market in pensions liabilities that essentially operates in the same way and on the same basis as the assets market, for example. So has it been beneficial? I think it's been beneficial in that it does provide a connection to the real world. So market values are what you could get for your assets now. But I think it's been less than beneficial in that, in some sense, what you can get for your assets now doesn't actually say how good they're going to be at meeting the liabilities over a 20, 30, 40-year period as they come due. So I don't want to give an answer. I'm sorry. What's our unique insight? I don't know. I think our unique insight is, I always feel that it's partly about stepping back and seeing the big picture and saying, what are you really trying to do here? And providing the mathematical basis and understanding how that fits into the real world. Did we lose our way because of Black Skulls? Can we reclaim our position? I think we can possibly reclaim a different position. I don't think, I always get wary when people say, oh, wasn't it fantastic 10, 20, 30 years ago? I can sort of see the words golden age floating above people's heads. I'm not sure there ever was a golden age, but I think that we can reinvent ourselves, do better in different ways. I think trying to return to the past is always a mistake.
I think that's been a very fulsome answer on both of those, and demonstrated that you do know quite a lot about these subjects, Louise. So I hope that has addressed those questions for the attendees that were asking them. I'm actually going to pick up on you talked there in your answer about reinvention. And we've had a number of questions in that perhaps are a little bit along that theme. I mean, one specifically that says, you know, the story of your career and your life so far, there is a sense that every so often you reinvent yourself. So one attendee interested to know kind of how do you do that, and are there any kind of tricks and tips around that? But also quite a few questions talking about the balance between the sort of naturally, shall I say, naturally cautious approach that actuaries often have, partly through the way that they've been trained and qualified, and how that sits along this idea of experimentation and fast failure, and continuing to just kind of keep moving and adapting. And also some students saying, how should they think about this as people starting out in their actuarial careers and still learning? So I think probably I'm asking you, what are the one or two things that you would encourage people to focus on when they're thinking about, you know, how to stay adaptive and be in a learning mode?
Okay, this may come as a surprise. I think of myself as very risk averse. I'm not a risk taker. I don't think of myself as a risk taker. Now, I admit that looking back over my career history, that's not the impression that I necessarily give. You know, I have been very lucky. I have always made sure that I've got some sort of safety net, for example, that I could go back to. I mean, at one stage when I tried something new, I remember thinking it was a time when I can't remember what was going on in the pensions world, but there were a lot of actuaries doing contracting work, sort of basically going through individual cases on something or other. I can't remember the details. And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to try this new thing, but if it doesn't work, I can always do that. You know, there's always something I can do. So I guess that's where that is where the risk aversity comes in. I like doing new things. I like learning about new things, and usually how I've gone into a new field is by getting interested in it first, and interested enough to read about it, to learn about it, and then thinking, well, actually, maybe this sounds really fascinating. I really want to get more into this, and how can I do that? So people often ask me now, well, you know, I'm an actuary, I don't know anything about climate change or sustainability, how can I get into it? Well, the answer is find out about it. There's a lot of resources on the IFoA website now. Get involved with working parties if you can. I found volunteering is a fantastic way of learning about new things. And once you do that, once you learn more about it, you can start to add value, because you can start to combine the new things you're learning about with your existing experience in new ways, and then you're offering value to people. And that also provides a way of doing the experimentation, I suppose, by not necessarily making a career leap sort of into the middle of nowhere, but making a volunteering leap, if you like. And it doesn't have to be through the IFoA. You can get involved with all sorts of other organizations to learn about new things. Is there anything I've missed there? Basically, I guess that the thing is to try things out in a fairly controlled and harmless way before you make bigger changes.
That's really great. It sounds as though what you're saying is sort of take it a step at a time.
Yeah.
So as you look back, it can feel as though you made some quite big changes and big decisions along the way. But in fact, they were all, as you were experiencing them, kind of quite small steps where you'd put your toe in the water and tried something, and then kind of see if it takes you to the next stage along that road. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily feel like a revolution while you're doing it. Yeah, that's that's really good. Right, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but I think we've probably got time for a couple more questions, if I may, Louise. One of the topics that you did talk about in your address, and we haven't yet touched upon, and it kind of would seem remiss not to talk about it, is the pandemic, the thing that has changed all our lives in the last kind of year and a half. And the question that I have about this that has come in from an attendee is, are you happy with kind of the voice of actuaries within the pandemic? I think they mean probably kind of whether the profile and the role of actuaries in the pandemic has been where it should be. And what do you think we have done well, and what could and should we do better in this area?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I mean, it's fairly clear that in many ways the IFoA isn't set up for rapid response. and in many ways it possibly shouldn't be. So, for example, we had the COVID-19 Actuaries Response Group was able to do rapid response because it operated outside the IFoA bureaucracy. And they did some fantastic work. They got together really quickly, and they've been issuing bulletins for, I mean, you know, sort of 15 months now, responding to things as they've happened. And they've had a very slick and effective way of doing that. And I think have really done well and have been a very good voice for actuaries during that time. And that, in fact, turned out to work really well with ICAT, the IFoA COVID Action Task Force, which had a slightly longer term perspective. We were setting up a lot of work streams that weren't responding within a matter of days or weeks, but were looking at things over a period of months, or in some cases even years. So that provided a good balance. The CMI, I thought, did really well during the pandemic, upping the frequency of its bulletins and making some very, again, it was very predictable what they were saying, in that they had a reasonably regular schedule of bulletins that all took the same form, but it provided a very good cumulative commentary on what was going on. I think that what I'd like to see the IFoA learn from this would be a way of directly supporting small groups like the Actuaries Response Group, learning to recognize that not everything has to be done in the same way, to live with a plurality of groups with varying levels of formal affiliation with the IFoA, and that just getting actuaries' voices out there is good, and it doesn't all actually have to come with an official stamp.
Thanks, Louise. I think I would agree with that, in terms of that's what struck me, is that actually if we just focus on what needs to be done and kind of not worry too much about who's doing it, actually the cumulative effect of that is quite powerful. So thank you. I think I've probably got time for one final question, and it's probably the one theme of your address that we've not touched on yet. We've had quite a few different questions in on this, but I think I'm going to try and focus it into a fairly practical question for you. So this is about the theme of diversity, which again, you know, you spoke very passionately about. I think anyone who has followed your career to date will know it's a subject you care about a great deal. So the question, the kind of distillation of questions that I want to ask you is, what are the areas that you think we, and the we in this I think is probably the IFoA and the profession, what are the areas you think we need to focus on next in the area of diversity? And in particular, what practical progress will you want to see during your presidential year on this topic?
I think the first thing we need to do, the area we need to focus on, is actually listening to people involved and learning what their lived experience is. I mean, I know what my lived experience is, but I can't second guess what other people's experience is. So we have to listen to what people say and to take that seriously. And that will help us think about what the barriers are to entry. Why don't people start in on the actuarial profession? Is it because they feel unwelcome? Is it because they feel they aren't right? Is it because they don't see people like them? I don't know, and I can't guess. We have to find out. And then if we, I mean, people often talk about this in terms of a pipeline. So we're talking about getting people in, sucking people into the pipeline. And then if we carry on with this rather unfortunate analogy, how do people leak out from the pipeline? And again, we might have ideas, I have ideas, I'm sure you have ideas, but we actually need to listen to people and find out. And that will then help us do things to address the problems that people identify. We need absolutely to collect data. As I said, we're a profession founded on data. We don't actually know what the situation is along many of these dimensions at the moment. So we need to find out, and that means collecting data. And I would certainly like to see that during the next year. I'd also like to see more progress with our events. I mean, it's been brilliant. It's much better than it used to be. For many, many years, I used to go to sessional meetings, first in Edinburgh and then in London. And I used to make sure that I stood up and made a contribution in every single sessional meeting I went to, whether I knew anything about the topic or not. And I did that for two reasons: to make sure that there was at least one woman speaking, and in many cases I was the only woman, and also to lower the average age of people speaking. And it was surprisingly recently that stopped being true, the average age bit. So we need to think about that. And I look at the conferences we put on. There's several at the moment, online conferences, and you look at the sort of front page, the advertisement page, beautiful, lots of pictures of all sorts of different people, you know, different ages, different genders, different colors, the whole lot, and it looks fantastic. And then you go into the detailed program, and the surprising number of the sessions are still manels. They are still sessions with 2 or 3 white men presenting. This needs to change.
Louise, I like the practical things in there, the focus on data collection, which in a way is also a part of the listening. But I also love what I hope has been an encouragement to the attendees out there who may represent all different kinds of diverse characteristics to speak up hopefully when we're able to be in person again, and also just to get involved in that sense of, as you did in the sessional meetings, bringing that different voice and, as you say, changing the average age. It dawned on me as you were speaking, Louise, that we may have broken a new IFoA record here in terms of being the first presidential address that has only had women in it. That might be a nice place for me to say, sadly, it's time for me to draw this to a close, because we are pretty much out of time. So it has been a fascinating walk through your passions and your priorities for society, for the actuarial profession, and for the IFoA. And I think you've also given us a real insight into how you will lead us through the coming year, and the areas that we can expect to see you focusing on and speaking out about during that year. So I think that what I would like to do is thank, at our height, I think we had about 330 attendees on the session, and most of you have stayed with us right through. So I'd very much like to thank all of you. You should be able to see a QR code on your screen, which enables you to give us some feedback if you want to just take a quick scan of that. So do please give us any feedback if you want to. And perhaps most importantly, Louise, on behalf of those hundreds of attendees who have listened to you this morning, let me say thank you on their behalf for what was such an interesting and inspiring presidential address. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.